to file suit. This is a rule that is not consistent with the Constitution and is not legally authorized through congressional statutes. There is no federal police power. The federal government can't just unilaterally impose medical policy under the guise of workplace regulation, and that is exactly what they're trying to do here. They don't provide any instances why the workplace is somehow different than anything else that's been done with any of this. This is an attempt to shoehorn policy through the bureaucracy in a way that will be difficult for some of these individuals and private parties to resist. I think it's interesting that this is being done under the guise of emergency power. This was announced 2 months ago, and it said this is an emergency and that this is grave danger is facing. Then why did it take you 2 months to issue the rule? And then, of course, the rule doesn't take effect until January, which is convenient because it'll minimize workforce disruptions over the holiday season, which we know we're likely to see anyways, and then this would only exacerbate that. So this is not consistent with a government of limited and enumerated powers. There is no general police power. There's no power to mandate on the American people from the federal government. People will sometimes point out about state mandates and how those have been imposed through the years and have the constitutionality has been upheld. States clearly have a general police power, whatever the wisdom of a particular mandate is. It's much different when the federal government is imposing that on tens of millions of Americans, particularly without any legislative sanction. At the end of the day, individuals should make informed choices about their own health care. They shouldn't be coerced into getting a jab. In this situation, you're going to have people that are going to have to make that decision. Do you get fired from your job, or do you do this if this may be something that you don't think is something that you want to do? And just be clear with what OSHA is doing. They're clearly not doing science because they reject immunity through prior infection. They reject the Israel study and all the very strong studies that have come out that show people that have recovered from COVID have strong protection. They totally cast that aside, and they make no accommodation or acknowledgement of that in any way, shape, or form. But ultimately, people should be able to make these decisions. I don't think people want this decision yanked away from them. I don't think they want to allow a precedent where the federal government could come in and just force you to do what it wants you to do. And make no mistake about it, those individuals who have gone through a normal vaccination series for COVID, you will be determined to be unvaccinated very soon. They will do that. They are going to tell you you're unvaccinated and you have to get a booster. Otherwise, you could potentially face loss of employment or other types of penalties. So that is going to happen. They're not putting that in the rule, but they're already asking for feedback on how to do this going forward. So this is just the tip of the iceberg. It's going to get more restrictive. There's going to be more power brought to bear going forward if we don't stand up now and fight back. I just think people are so sick of constantly being bossed around, restricted, mandated, all these different things. We've had enough of it, and we want people to be able to make their own decisions. And so it is important to stand up for people's individual ability to make decisions for themselves. I also think it's just the constitutionality is very significant, the individual freedom very significant, but put those even aside, what's the practical result of this? The practical result of this is going to exacerbate a lot of the existing problems that we're seeing with the economy, particularly as it relates to the supply chain, the ability to get goods to market. This is not going to help the inflation that we've seen in the economy. I could tell you that is definitely not going to help making sure that the shelves are stocked in stores around this country. If you just take a very small fraction of, say, truckers, and that they lose their jobs as a result of this, that is going to be catastrophic, and you're going to see ripple effects throughout the entire economy. So, and then just from another practical perspective, they actually say in the rule, unvaccinated people are at risk because vaccinated people can get and transmit the Delta variant. And I think that is true, but how is it better for an unvaccinated person to get fired from their job. Do you think the first thing they're going to do is run out and get the jab after they've already been fired over it? Of course they're not going to do that. I don't even see how this moves the needle in a positive direction for those folks. So this is going to cause more economic pain, and I think it's going to end up being a huge mistake. We need more people to fill a lot of these key positions, certainly in Florida, and I think in other parts of the country as well. This is only going to make it even more difficult. So, State of Florida will be filing the lawsuit, which is very, very important, and I know there'll be other states that are doing it and other courts of appeals. Because it's an OSHA challenge, it goes directly to the 11th Circuit, and so we're going to be asking for a stay of this rule, which we think is very, very important. And then, of course, we're going to be having a special legislative session starting a week from Monday, and we want to provide protections for individual employees in the state of Florida. They should not be getting fired over this. We want to make sure that that's something that's abundantly clear. We're also going to look at ways to be able to provide protections for businesses who may be subjected to potentially very harsh penalties. You know, they're going to fine people $14,000 for every single infraction. I don't know how they're going to enforce this. They're certainly not going to be able to enforce it in a way that is even-handed, and I think there's going to be huge problems with just administrability. But $14,000, you know, if you have a half dozen people, you're supposed to maintain, the employer is actually supposed to maintain these medical records now. So you thought you just went to the job and did your job, clocked out and went home and went about your business. Now your employer is going to be in charge of making sure that they have your medical records on file for this stuff. Is that really the direction that we want to go? Is that the type of economy that we want to have? You know, I don't think so. So we are going to be able to we need to do legislative response as well. And I think that that's something that will be, I think even more so when a lot of people that have been very concerned about this, even apart from this mandate, because there are large companies who are trying to do this anyways. And people are very concerned about it, and this is something that hits very, very close to home for people. We called the legislative session. There was a lot of people that were happy about that, but I think now more people are understanding this is something that needed to be done. I mean, we've got to stand up. We've got to stand up for the constitutional order. We've got to stand up for the rights of individual Floridians and Americans, and we need to try to avoid bad policy that's going to end up hindering an already problematic national economy. And certainly in Florida, we've been able to buck some of those trends, but there's a lot of storms on the horizon, so why would we want to exacerbate that? So for all those reasons, I think people are really excited to come back here and to be able to make sure that the people of Florida have their voice heard on this. I've gone through a lot of it. I've seen some stuff. There's some interesting nuggets in here. You know, we're going to go through some more and make sure that folks are understanding kind of what's here. But they are asking for input about how much further they could go in the future. So I just want to warn people, as far-reaching as this is only the beginning for what they're contemplating doing going forward. And so there's a massive amount of federal power being exercised here, not through legislative sanction. Certainly that doesn't flow directly from the enumerated powers in the Constitution. This is coming from a federal agency, which is certainly not an agency that has ever been tasked with doing things like respiratory viruses. And so this is really, really significant. And I think it's a huge mistake, but I'm confident that this is not something that's ultimately going to pass constitutional muster. So we'll stand up. We'll stand up for the Constitution. We'll stand up for people's rights. We'll stand up for people's jobs. And I think that you will see this put on hold relatively quickly as these cases start to get filed. And with that, I could take a couple questions. Mike? I think it's a combination. I don't think that as elected officials, we can just subcontract out people's freedoms to courts, because courts don't always come through when they need to come through. So we have a responsibility, regardless of what the courts would do, to protect people. But I will say, I think this is so far beyond what we've ever seen before that we get this up in the 11th Circuit, I think we have a very, very high chance of success, certainly in front of the whole court if we get an en banc hearing. Of course, as you get these panels, it determines what kind of judge you get. You may get different, but I think ultimately we will. I think they'll win in the 5th Circuit. I think we're also seeing challenges in the 6th and the 8th, and I would anticipate that. And I think you're going to see a lot of adverse rulings on this, and it will eventually go to the U.S. Supreme Court. I think that's clear. Yes, sir. Well, our state will not be facilitating this in any respect, of course. I mean, we don't believe it's constitutional. So I think I wouldn't even need to do an executive order, but if I need to, I will, because it just simply goes beyond what the federal government's authority is. And so that's what we'll do. We also want to provide protections for businesses who may get caught in the crosshairs here. We could get this thing enjoined pretty quickly on a preliminary basis. That could happen. So by the time we meet for special session, who knows? It's possible there's action. It's possible that there hasn't been yet. So we will have a responsibility legislatively, but that ultimately is the best power. Unilaterally, what you can do, you're limited in executive action. During COVID, when people were using emergency, I think those powers were abused, but that was the guise of it. Outside of that, you can't do executive orders against society as a whole. And I think that's part of the problem with this is not just applying to government. This is using a totally different subsection of law and authority to try to shoehorn in policy against the broader public. And I think that's why it's ultimately going to go down. But we in Florida, we need the legislature. They need to come in and they need to do this because that's how you do it consistent with the rule of law. It's not just executives issuing edicts against society, which are not, whether they're even valid in these emergency, I think it went way beyond what it should have. But clearly, and if you're not in an emergency situation, you don't have the ability to do it. The idea that this is an emergency after most of these people have been working for a year and a half straight. Most of these people, the people in the trucking and logistics and all this stuff, they've kept society going for a year and a half. And now all of a sudden you're saying this is an emergency and that you take 2 months to do the rule, that it's so emergent that you couldn't even just turn this around quickly. So you do it in 2 months and then you're saying it doesn't apply for another 2 months. That's not emergency. That's them trying to make policy without having to go through the proper channels through the Congress because they know they wouldn't be able to enact this if they went through the Congress.